I have to go upstairs? Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. My name is Sonia Barber. I work for Council and Economic Development. I'm just doing the formal stuff that we need to do. Then I'll hand over to Russell for introductions. Firstly, thank you everyone for coming. It's great attendance. I would like to just let you know that the toilets are out through this door and down the hallway to the left. In case of an emergency, we evacuate out these doors, down the ramp, and assemble over near where the gallery is being built. I would also like to thank the Mayor and councillors for attending today, and also the acting CEO and all of you for coming and showing such an interest in this great project. So I'll hand over to Russell to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. She didn't even have the tap dancing shoes on. I'd like to thank everybody for coming as well. It's good to see such a rollout for what I hope you will find to be a very informative session, and you will not be bored by Michael's presentation. I assume that some of you have come probably with one question or two questions. I just ask you to keep a broader mindset to what you're doing, and there's a lot of information being presented today, and we would welcome you to come and talk to us afterwards. Paul and Michael will be gone this afternoon, but we will be here, and we've got the data, and we would like obviously to be able to ensure that the data is leveraged to support new development within the region. That's why we asked them to do it. I'll introduce the two speakers. So I think just one speaker, but Michael Matusik and Paul Broadbent, who's on the lower level. We engaged them, and they've been doing this kind of work for a long period of time, so we wanted to take advantage of that experience and their familiarity with trends in the country and trends in other locations to be able to square the data that they have determined relevant to our particular region. So that's what we wanted, to put it in that context and understand for you how we're comparing with others, and therefore what those opportunities are for us, and what the new directions may be for us as we continue to grow this region. And because that is the intent of what we're doing. We're in a current crisis that we don't have enough accommodation in all forms, and that was one of the reasons we did this. But we also wanted to know what we needed to be providing in the future so that we are targeting the right product for the right demographics. So I'll let Michael continue with that, but that's part of the rationale for why we engage them. I think an informed community is a community that's going to know how to invest, where to invest, and why to invest. So I'll hand it over to Michael. Thank you. You got that one?
Yes, okay, hello. My name's Michael Matusik, that's Paul Broad. He's the intelligent one. I'm the song and dance man, okay? So I'm going to do a song and dance. I've done lots of this, and it's good to see you're a typical audience. Nobody sat up the front. So if you want to move, you still can, because I'm going to use this whiteboard a lot, and I'm going to write in a very small font, so you people at the back are going to be punished, okay? No, I'm not going to do that. It's good to see that a council, in this case Livingstone Shire Council, has employed Paul and I to do a work like this. We have done lots of housing demand studies over 20 to 30 years of doing this type of work. Mainly that's employed by the development community who want to push an agenda with the council. Whilst it has happened in other places, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, Brisbane, some interstate councils as well, Logan City particularly of recent years, who have employed myself and or Paul with me, and Paul by himself, because we do run separate businesses as well as work together. You're one of the rare councils here have actually been proactive. So that's a good thing. So as a development community, That's a positive. So you need to embrace that opportunity that the council is looking for a path forward and not just reacting. Okay, that's a good thing. I'm going to talk for a little while. We have produced a study. It is a report. We don't write a lot. We write in big font, 12 font, double spaces. It's a one-page executive summary. I don't know how that's going to be released, but you can read it in the ad breaks of Sale of the Century. I'm showing my age, but it's a relatively easy read. It's a quick read. You might disagree with some of the content and what I'm going to talk about. That's your prerogative. We are right. Ha ha. Okay? Some of which we're going to talk about. You might shake your head and don't see it. We've done this a few times before, so let's cover that. I'm going to look at 10 or 12 things that we found in the study, just as major points to start off with. I'm going to use the whiteboard to do that. I'm then going to talk about where the housing market is and where it's at and what its future looks like. I'm actually going to introduce some figures about COVID and internal migration that came out today. So we're up to date as of like 2 or 3 hours ago in terms of ABS, and they've brought those figures forward. And some of those figures aren't going to be as positive as some of you think, okay? But it does support our case and what we've been talking about. We're going to then talk about the details of the housing study and what we found. And we're going to then use this large board for a couple of key tables, and I'm going to run through how we do this and what we found. And then I'm going to talk about some housing forms, typologies I call them, and the type of thing that we think's in demand. We can prove it's been in demand in other locations, not only urban locations in capital cities, but in regional locations and often in small places as well. And they have similar demographics moving forward as you do. And then we're going to have a bit of a wrap up, and then we're going to take questions and comments and so forth. Preferably questions, not comments. If you have anything that's really planning based and is the detail behind the planning side of things, please ask them, but I'm going to say that in due course that's recorded, and then somebody's going to come back to you, because whilst Paul and I are qualified town planners, it's not our role to answer on behalf of Livingstone Shire Council's planning department or to take a political question per se. You can air it, but I won't be able to answer that. So if we could direct the questions mainly to the research and the market and the supply situation, that would be good. Happy with that? Keep on going? Don't want to move anybody? We found that this study was for a 5-year period. It wasn't some fantasy thing in the future about 20 years, 30 years, for the next 5 years. So 2021, today, to 2026. So it's a 5-year period, and as you know, it's already February, so these things happen really quickly, so it's immediate. And we found over that 5-year period, the likelihood that the population's going to increase by about 650 people per annum. That's the Livingstone Shire population. That's likely to happen each year. And there are 3 major markets driving that population growth and that population change. The first one's quite rare for a regional town, and that is young renters. So the young rental market is one of the changes. The second are downsizers, people downsizing, and the third is retirees. They are the key 3 markets showing the most population change in the next 5 years. Yes, there's family market here, and we'll talk about that and how we measure demographic change soon. But moving forward, those markets are going to see the biggest change. Not as a percentage growth in terms of 1.2% growth, but in actual numbers. Because all we are interested in when Paul and I do this work are the numbers, the bums on seats, the things that matter when you're building a house or supplying stock. So they were the couple of major things. This translates, 650 translates to 330 new dwellings every year. You have to build that each year. Before I go much further, I will be using a whiteboard, and you actually get to see my better side, which is my back, okay? So I do apologise for that. Occasionally my back will be turned to you. So 330 new dwellings per year. You've roughly been supplying that over recent years. You don't have enough stock in the market. A lot of you have been caught short because of home builder and the COVID flight to some degree. We could argue the way the process applications and so forth hasn't been keeping up with demand as well. We won't say whose blame that is. It's a combination of errors there, or not missed opportunities. Houses. if we just look at houses alone in this shire, on average, there is just less than 2 people per house. Some have 7 or 8 people in them, true. Some have 1, but on average it's 2. That's very low. That's in compared to other regions, it's something like 3.5 to 4. So you have actually got a very low utilisation of your stock. You could argue, well, that's the buyer's preference. They can do what they like. True, if they can afford it, if they want to run the mower, if they want to live out of town, they want to drive everywhere and not walk as much. So that's another finding that we were surprised at. I'm going to rub this off and continue. Another 4 points. Let me have a look at my notes to make sure I don't say Rockhampton or something like that. Okay, 10%. So according to the census, last census, 10% of the property here was unoccupied at the time of the census, which was August. It's probably not as high as it is during summer, but 1 in 10 properties here aren't used. They're locked up. They're used on the weekends, they're used occasionally. They're used as, maybe not as batches or the like, as you call them in New Zealand, but they're used occasionally. There's an opportunity in that to actually use that stock by dangling a carrot, maybe not hitting them with a stick, the owners of that property. I do suspect that if we ran that poll today, that's probably a lot less because of tightness of vacancy rate, but over the last 3 censuses, it's hovered around that period, that type of period. Here's 3 figures that are interesting, that are worth noting. 10% of people nominate that they work at home. That was before COVID, but that's 10%. And 25% of the professionals say they work at home. That's probably higher now because of COVID too, but that's a high number, particularly the 25% as professional audience. And it's very hard to work at home unless the house is designed for that purpose, and it's more than just having a study, particularly if you're running a business and you want a separate entrance and things like that. That's worth noting. And 5% declare already that they need some form of health assistance to the home. I suspect it's higher than that because admitting that is not something that a lot of people do. I reckon it's closer to 10%. Of course, as you get older, that percentage increases. So that's already happening in there. I'm building a story about the product that we're going to get to. Latest visitor study, which was only done early last year, so it's slightly maybe different from COVID period. 10% of households here have a visitor in them most of the time. So it's a place where people use their friends and relatives and stay at their place to go to the beach and stay in the region and so forth. And 60% of the people who visit here, or 66 it is, of the people who visit here actually either stay with friends and relatives or stay in some form of Airbnb internal to the house or part of the house structure rather than a service department. So I'm not saying service departments aren't important, but they're already occupying a housing stock which is more traditional housing than purpose-built tourism type stock. I'm not saying there's not a market for purpose-built tourism stock, and when we talk about our housing product coming forward, when I talk about the missing middle and townhouses and terraces and things like that, don't, because it's easy to do and I've seen it many times and Paul's seen it many times as well, jump to the conclusion that we're talking about apartments and big tall things near the water. We're not. Okay? That's the thing that's in least demand moving forward, particularly over that next 5-year period. It's not to say that one might not be built and it won't sell and it won't be successful, but that would be, I think, somewhat surprising. The sales risk is very high for that product. Yeppoon and Emu Park and the wider Yeppoon area and Emu Park area are the places, as you know, where most of the development has been taking place, and that's expected to increase in the future. So there's 2 pulse points in the Shire, and that's likely to stay. Doesn't mean it's all going to be downtown and close to where we're staying, but I think there'll be an increasing focus on those opportunities and where that is. I also want to mention that your lot sizes are starting to decline as an average. You've got 2 markets, 800 to 1,000 square metres generally, and then 4,000 metres plus. And it's really this type of stock's becoming more popular, and this is starting to drop away. Not so much only because of demand, but the supply of that stock. So you're seeing lot sizes fall, and what's causing some issues in terms of affordability is the rate per square metre of your land is increasing. That's a reflection of supply and demand, and also a reflection of this stock becoming more popular. What does that say? We have looked somewhat extensively at storage in the area, particularly off-site storage and the like. We'll get to why soon, except we found that of the 5 major storage facilities in town, which are about 200 cubicles or sheds or whatever you want to define them as, there is 100% occupancy. There's a waiting list to get in them. None of them, in a secure sense, cater for a caravan or a boat. They're all too small. And the people we interviewed there on those things have told us that. There's people who come with their caravans and boats, but there's no space to put them in. There is a want for that. And we've experienced in other places that want will come at the expense of the shed in the yard. They'll trade that. If they offset their housing in a better location and they'll live in a smaller property, particularly land size, and not have to store that on site, particularly if it's secure and particularly if there's other people who do the same, and it's associated with things like a men's shed and that, okay? It's a place to hang out, okay? Not just for the guys, okay? Mostly, but not only. And the last thing I want to talk about is that if we take a wider stance, and it is important because you're not the only place in the world. I know it's nice here and some of you think that you should be, but as a competitive market and as people are moving from internal migration in terms of moving from the Brisbanes and elsewheres and interstate even to regional town, you are only one place on the shopping list and you are falling behind in terms of your diversity of stock. You largely offer one thing at the moment. And if you don't want to get a ride-on mower or mow the grass and live in a big house set in the middle of that block, well, too bad. And some people, and increasing, a lot of people don't want to necessarily do that. You don't have a diversity of stock. You actually have a limitation in your housing affordability. You aren't as affordable bang for buck in other places near the water on the coast. And it's not just versus Hervey Bay, it's parts of Mackay and Townsville and so forth. You're not as competitive as you may have been in the past. And the third point is that your development ready stock, so your lot mix, we'll call it that, your housing affordability and your development ready stock is lacking. So if I come here and I wanted to move from Brisbane, say, and I was I am in my 50s and I want to say I've had enough of Brisbane living, I want to actually work from here, I like the place, I visit regularly, why don't we just get on with it and do it? I wanted to live in a 450 square metre lot or a townhouse infill, I can't buy it. I want to do that because I want to buy something under 450,000 because I want to not work as much, and I want to buy it now and maybe settle in 6 months. Not here. Okay, next port of call. And that's happening. Let's talk about the housing market. It's pretty good, isn't it? I'm amazed so many people here. It's not bad. It's been worse. So the housing market simply, I like to describe as a cycle, and the cycle's best described in 4 quarters. So we know there's a housing market cycle. We know that it repeats over time, that it's influenced by interest rates and migration and flood, and it's negatively influenced by floods and rising rates and so on. We're happy with that? I don't have to get into that? Yes? Yep, okay. So there's a housing market and it's cyclical. And usually what happens, if I use this as a cycle, there's 4 stages to the housing cycle. There's a recovery, an upturn, a downturn, and stagnation. This morning, Mayor and I talked to the press, so if I was talking to the press, we would call that a boom, and we'd call this a bust. They'd like to call it that, but this really is a peak, and this is a trough, okay? Your last cycle started in 2000 or 2000 odd, and you actually peaked into about 2004-05, and then you missed a cycle. That's sometimes what happens in a regional town because you oversupplied it and you overcapitalise. Some of the things sold were too expensive for the underlying demand once resources and that dropped off, and the frothy excitement of buying an apartment and the like in one of the towers dropped off, and those negatives started to sell for losses and so on. So you missed a cycle. You are now back here in 2021, Yeppoon is there in a recovery phase of the cycle. Let's make this easier. That's spring, that's summer, that's autumn, and that's winter. Warm, hot, cooling down, cool. This takes about normally 7 to 8 years from trough to trough. And so this takes 12 months to 2 years, 6 months to 12 months, a year to 2 years, and most of the time's stuck in where not much happens. Or yes, people buy and sell, but there's no real movement in the volume of sales, and there's not really much movement in price. So we're in a situation here where you're in a recovery phase. A lot of places in Australia, particularly in a regional sense, maybe not the Cairns of the world, which are really affected by tourist numbers, but many of the places are. One of the reasons that they haven't been supplying enough stock, and you've seen a surge in increase in demand driven by home builder and the COVID situation. Okay? So this is likely to recover in the next 12 months or so to a rising market. In summary, I do think that Australia-wide 2021 will be a sweet spot in terms of property market and to some degree economics and things like that. I don't think it's any accident that we're going to see, and we're already seeing noises and cabinet reshuffles. Not that that will do too much, I don't think. On the opposition side of things, I'm not declaring a winner. I'm just saying I don't think that will do too much, in that we're going to see a federal election in August to September this year. Of course, 2022 beyond is likely to be a lot harder. The reason that is that the demand is being brought forward by COVID, and there's going to be a hole in that demand. You can't keep building at that rate of level, particularly with lower population growth across Australia. There will be a supply correction, particularly in the capital cities to that case. And the COVID situation, I believe, will be what I call a snapback. Most people will not be able to live in a regional town. The regional town won't be for them, and their jobs are largely in CBD or not CBD, capital city environments, and they'll be called back to work. And the tourism uptake that's happened in recent year or so, because you can't travel, will actually bang back to overseas. The minute people can go to Bali, they'll go. The minute they can go overseas, they go. So much so there might even be a hole in your market for a period of time. You might not want me to say that. You might say, I'm hearing the opposite to that. I think heart of hearts, that's what's going to happen. And it would indicate in past things that that's likely to happen too. Let's quickly talk about migration and internal migration. These figures just came out today, so I'm going to have to look at these notes a little bit because I summarised them before. Okay, I'm going to look at this for a second. So this is internal migration. So it's a combination of interstate migration to Queensland and migration within the state, moving from Brisbane to Yeppoon or to Rockhampton and so forth. And the latest figures that cover 2020 versus 2019. So these are calendar years. The ABS has brought these figures out earlier than they normally would. And if we looked at just that internal migration component, remember population growth is a combination of overseas migration as a net case, in and out, internal migration as a net case, and natural increase, births over deaths. So here we're only talking about that middle component. And if we went to southeast Queensland, last year there was 21,500 people who actually, as a net result, moved into southeast Queensland, either from interstate or moving within the state. And the last 12 months, that's been 23,500. So you read a lot about southeast Queensland or Brisbane as dropping the number. That's not the case, it's actually increased. Sydney and Melbourne have dropped their numbers, true, but we'll keep our focus on Queensland here. So that's a 2,000 increase, and that's about a 10% change. When you look at regional Queensland, so southeast Queensland's to the border, includes the Gold Coast, goes out to Toowoomba, and includes Noosa. There has been a flight from Brisbane to the Sunshine Coast, to the Gold Coast, and to Toowoomba. You might argue that, well, you know, why bother, but that's what's happened. Regionally, there's been a good increase too, and it's actually been a 75% increase to regional Queensland. Give yourselves a pat on the back. It's great, isn't it? But sadly, the numbers don't lie, and it's 2,000 that was here positive the year before. It's 3,500 this year, so it's an increase of 1.5. That's a good increase, and will that continue probably into this year? Yes. The other important thing I want to talk about, happy with that? Shall we keep it going? I expected that to be quite a bit higher, but that's what it was, and those figures they might adjust those figures as the month or two go on, but I don't think they will change that much. Then if we look at the age groups, and this is an interesting thing that regions in Australia have to change. And this is beyond our study, but it's you need to get young people to stay in town. Now, you've got a different demographic, as I said at the beginning, where you've got young renters going to be an increasing market here. That's rare. Most regional towns, they lose that market. Okay? You've got to keep them by having them jobs and having the right accommodation. Okay? Because they can move where they like, particularly in search of work, and increasingly if they're not looking to buy a property because it's beyond their reach, their digs they live in and how they live with their mates and so forth becomes very important. And Russell can tell you from the States particularly, and we do follow the States, can't help that, hopefully not down the Trump line, but we do follow at the States about demographics and social things, so they're a shaper of the Western world. That's a very common and increasing trend in the United States. I'm not going to buy anything, I'm going to live how I want to live, and if it's not funky enough and not available, I'll move, because I can get in a car. So if we went 0 to 14, 15 to, 24, 25 to 44, 45 to 64, and 65 plus, and we said for just the September quarter last year, so it's right in COVID, okay? And we went southeast Queensland versus regional Queensland. I can't do it for Livingstone Shire, I'm sorry. Paul and I are brilliant, but we're not that good, okay? So we have to look at regional Queensland. The distribution of the migration, that's internal migration, intakes have been 25% there, 26%, 38%, and then 6% and 5%. So basically people who actually have been moving internally to the likes of southeast Queensland are those two age groups. Young people and families. The type of people you want to expand your community and economy. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with us oldies. There isn't. But we're downsizing. Our consumption's different. We're not driving things a certain way. And in regional Queensland, yeah, there's an increase in younger kids, which will translate later on into this market, but there's a fall of the younger market. And then if we go to what we'll call families, 27% increase in families, 35% of the empty nesters, and 15% of the older market. That is then adding further fuel to our research in terms of the housing forecast based on demographics looking over the next 5 years. It's actually adding strength to what I'm about to say, not undermining it. So a byproduct of this work is not only what housing do you provide for the demographic, and you're keeping a lot of this market here, but overall, if the broader region, not just Livingstone Shire, but Gladstone and Rocky and the Central Highlands and so forth, not only just in resources, how do you get this market to stay here? And frankly, you've got the bones of it here. It's not just the beach, it's the street, it's the town square, it's what they do, it's the boutique brewery that doesn't exist, or the three of them. It's how they go outside. For the life of me, you've got a big car park built downstairs. Why isn't the upstairs store of that used as an outside theatre and used with food trucks downstairs or something? I think that's a no-brainer. Things like that will attract this market and keep them here. They'll employ themselves. They're entrepreneurial. They get going. That's a byproduct. Can I actually have the big screen on, please? Ellie, you're going to come and turn this on? Thank you. Run, come on, quick. I now need to move this sideways because I need to talk about some of the key stuff from this study. I think that will work. You can stay there and change them for me? Okay, thank you. Okay, before we look at that and study that, just listen to me. I know it's hard. That's more attractive than I am. That was funny. It deserved a large laugh from that. So what Paul and I do when we do this work, we understand the stuff that we talked about before in terms of the state of play and those 10 or 12 points I mentioned. We talk to developers, we ground truth everything, we drive around every development, we walk through some of them, we spend time in the major centres and sit and have coffee and all that business because we're lazy buggers and we like to observe what's happening and so forth. We talk to storage things, we talk to cafe owners, we observe the people walking here are not only tourists but also residents. So we do that type of work. So we ground truth it, it's very important. We don't only take a bird's eye view, we take a worm's eye view, and we do both of those. That's an important thing. The first thing we do is we look at the demographics, and we just do that by age group. And that work, particularly in a forecast sense, is pretty good. Of course, we all age 1 year at a time. And whilst we use forecasts that are government-based, and in this case we use a median series because that's kind of been proven in the past in this region, as I said to the council guys who employed us, and I said today in the presentation to the elected representatives, that if the likes of Stockland, a major developer, came to town and was to build their normal housing mix, they would change the shape of the market moving forward. They would attract a lot more younger people than the stock that's here. So the markets change and respond to the stock that you're providing. I want to stress that. The moment we're looking forward on the type of stock that you've been providing in the market and the demographic shape that's likely to happen, and it's substantially boosted by what the latest figures that came out today from the ABS about who's moving to regional Queensland. The other thing we do is then we understand the market in terms of age, its household formation, and we also understand housing preference, and I'll get to that. So this is table 9. There's 50 odd tables in this document, but this is an important table where if we go to 2016, this shows the life cycle segment. So what we do when we look at the demographics, whilst we know age groups, we try and make it mean something to the development industry and mean something to most of us. So children are basically under 16 or 17. And then there's young renters that are somewhere in their 20s, to general description. Then there's first home buyers that are generally in their late 20s into their 30s. Then there's families. Some may have kids or not, but we just define them largely. Most of them have children and their families, and they're into their now late 30s and into their 40s. Downsizers are in their mid-50s to late 60s. Retirees often are into their late 60s and into their 70s. Not all of them retire. They do what I call recycle rather than retire, so they actually do something different, but they still work in some form. So don't envisage them that sitting around playing cards in a retirement village. That's not necessarily the case. Then you have people who are aged in their 80s, often ladies living alone, because the husbands had a harder life drinking, carrying on, as often the case, but you have an aged market. And if we look forward to 2026 estimations, forecasts of that count of those number of people, it's 42,000, and the distribution of that market is 23% for families, downsizers 21%, and 11% being for young renters. So there is still a market to buy the big home and in a urban, suburban type setting, but it's important when we look at the market to look at the change over time. This is the annual growth in population by those lifestyle segments over that 5-year period. A large proportion of them are going to be in retirees, downsizers, and then young renters. There is actually likely to be very little growth in the size of these segments moving forward. Also, what happened is home builders bringing a lot of first home buyers forward now, and they're making their decisions earlier than maybe they would have. They've been pulled forward by the incentives. Can I see the next chart? So we know, and we estimate there's going to be 650 increase in population per annum over the next 5 years. We know the household size on average across Australia for those type of markets. That's actually reported by the ABS and is updated on a regular basis. So we actually use those cuts to actually work out underlying housing demand. Obviously, there's more people traditionally living in a family than there is somebody aged and often living alone, or in half a person sometimes living them. The statistical average, so you could see through that. And this is the need for housing moving forward. 330, as we said, a large proportion of those homes will be needed for retirees and downsizers and young renters, but a large proportion will be for this older market. Next slide, thank you. And then what we do is Paul and I've done a lot of work surveying the market according to, can we go back one? Is that possible? According to those lifestyle segments, and we have 3 cuts of this market. We have people who live in a very urban setting, in a Brisbane, in a Melbourne, in a Sydney, in a Perth, for argument's sake, those who live in a more suburban setting but in a capital city, and those who live in a regional town. And we've used the housing preferences of those people who live in a regional town. And we started that work about 10 years ago, and I survey my database of 20-odd thousand. I don't survey all of them, but I survey those who have actually nominated that they want to be surveyed in this regard, and I ask them for their housing preferences on a every second year or so to update that. It's important that there's an assumption in that housing survey preference in that if they were preferring a townhouse, it would make sense for them value for money. So if you were to buy a 4 or 5 bedroom property on a 4,000 square metres and it costs $650,000, you wouldn't expect the townhouse to cost the same money. You would expect that it would cost $400,000 to $450,000. So that's an important caveat, that they could buy their housing preference at the right price point. Now I'm going to introduce 2 concepts here that are important. First is that density needs to be offset. So if you're going to have tighter digs and smaller homes, not necessarily that much smaller, and smaller land parcels and so forth, you can't just build them anywhere. They're best if they're built next to where the amenity is, where views are, and the amenities not just shops and the water. They can be parks, they can be recreational areas and so forth. And the other thing is that they're often in the planning side of things, and particularly from a state government side of view, they like to count dwellings per hectare. That's the wrong count. It should be people per hectare. And I suspect that, and so do several people in council, suspect that there is an underutilisation of the existing infrastructure here, because there is large homes, and particularly downtown, there's a lot of vacant sites. There's a capacity to increase the population living here by a number of people per hectare, not just dwellings. We'll get to that soon, but I want to raise those points. Next. So if you model through the housing preferences, and we looked at the demographics moving forward, if we were Paul and I employed to have a stab at what's actually, well, more than a stab, a dart throw at the right wall, and we think we've got it, at least hitting the dartboard, that this is the property demand by product type moving forward. A large proportion will be what I call the missing middle, okay? It's likely to be small lot homes. Here we're talking about things that are on 450, 500 square metre lots. They might be built as 0 lot lines or standalone detached homes on freehold title. I don't want to get too locked down about, are they 350 square metres or 400? It's the concept that they're living on a smaller block of land than 1,000 square metres, and they're living on a smaller block of land than 4,000 square metres. I'm not saying that market's going to disappear. It will stay. I suspect that when you start providing this stock, those markets will actually increase as well. Because the person who's young in downtown who can opportunity to sell that property to have that redeveloped probably have 2 children, and they would like to then move to some form of acreage or something. So it's a sales trade that happens. there's a market for dual occupancy and backyard housing. Now, I own a backyard housing business. I don't write this so I can get some business. I have that business with 2 others because this demand is very high and rising in Australia. And there's also a demand for dual occupancy homes. I'll talk more about what that is in a minute and define that, except to say that Livingstone Shire Council is one of the rare councils in Queensland where they actually encourage that development and allow it to happen so that investors and families should be able to build it. Yet it is not really done. And I don't think it's done because it's not widely known outside of this area. One of the things I said to council is promoting that would actually get you a lot more interest from investors, and it would get you a lot more activity from certain building groups to have that happen. So that's a strong market. And there are plenty of existing sites in and around town to do that at a very cost-efficient manner and a very strong yield to the owner. And in the dual occupancy sense, we're amazed when you drive around some of the existing developments why there is not more dual occupancy homes. Townhouses and terraces are a strong market. We're not necessarily talking about townhouse developments of 100 or 50. We're talking about 10, 12, 15, 20 in pods with their own identity and so forth. And there's ways to do that well. We're talking in some cases about small infill apartment developments. We're talking 6, 8, 10 in a development, 2 per floor, designed very well for the owner-occupier. That's who the target market is. It's the retiree or the downsizer. Walk to things. They can have their boat and that too. It can be in a storage facility not far down the road, and they can visit that and they can get it out and they can use it and put it back and talk to their mates, you know, and share fishing stories and about the one that got away and all those things that guys never do. Large complexes are very small. Aged care is quite big. And whilst we're saying traditional detached houses are a small market, they will resell in the residential space, no doubt, and there will be a market to build some of them. We actually think that if there was a preference of housing stock, that would actually be the lower of the housing preferences rather than the higher ones that are offered. Thank you. Might not be 100% happy with that. You might have some questions about that, but that's what our work as a nutshell found. Now, I just want to draw a few pictures of the type of stock that I'm talking about. So here, let's talk about some low-hanging fruit that's somewhat easy to do. Because the council wants you to do it. They've actually got policies that allow it to happen. The first is dual occupancy home. So here's a block of land. Forget its size, 4,000, 1,000 square metres, 800 square metres, doesn't matter. Instead of building a normal 3 or 4 or 5 bedroom home, this is what happens elsewhere in the world. And it happens in southeast Queensland and it happens in regional Queensland in some cases, where the house is built originally. It's the same one title, one owner, and this is a 3-bedroom component and that's a 2-bedroom component. That might be a 4-bedroom and that might be a 1-bedroom, but generally it's 3 and 2. This is a housing for life. First home buyer buys this, for example, and they live in that side in their first couple of years of life, and they rent out this side, and in today's mortgage and situation, they probably will cover nearly all their expenses, including principal and interest. Well, maybe not a lot of the principal, but at least their interest component. As they have their first or second child, they move into here and they rent this out. As their child get older, whilst that's a physical separation, and particularly they've got teenagers hold, they occupy all of it. Then the kids leave home, one boomerangs back, brings the girlfriend or the boyfriend. You know, there's only so much noise you can tolerate in that situation. So they occupy that and they should be paying rent. They leave, then you've got your outlaw, your mother-in-law, who's now living with you, and you don't want her living in your house, but she has to live on the property because the missus is not going to have her live in an aged care home, so she lives in there. And 30 years go by. This is not a killer, okay, but I do mention it, that 30 years go by and you're the owner of that property and you actually subdivide that off and you sell that and it helps with your super fund. Now, if I talk to mum and dad, and I've done it in regional towns as well, and there's 100 people in the audience, 80 will put up their hand plus and say, where can I buy one of them? The investor market is craving that stock. Most shires in southeast Queensland have just done this. Moreton Shire, as of recently as this last month. You can't do that. Or you can do it, but you're basically going to have swear and sign your life away through stat dec that is only going to be occupied by a family member, a household member, however you want to define it. That's scared a lot of the market, where Livingstone Shire Council allow you to do it. They also allow you another piece of low-hanging fruit, and that is existing house, and build something that's 80 square metres or lower. Make sure it's got the right setbacks in the back of your yard. You can do that for 80 to 100 grand. There used to be, I think it was Troppo Homes, that used to do that here all the time. If I could promote that to my database, but I can, now that I know about it, there'll be quite a few people, investors, who will come to a region like this and say, that makes perfect sense to me, I'd like to build one of those. They would look to buy some of this stock that's in and around Emu Park, and particularly Yeppoon, and they would look to do that straight away. I've got enough figures there to prove that there would be a demand for Airbnb, or particularly there would be demand for the rental market, resource-based, and where your vacancy rate's so tight. If I was in an expanding investment phase, which I'm not because of a range of reasons, I'd be looking at that straight away. There's things not far from here, you just drive around, that are primed to do that in. And some of them have got 2-street frontage. So you could argue that you could even subdivide that potentially, and so forth. I'm not saying the council will necessarily say, yeah, you could do that straight away, but that's an opportunity that's being missed. So they're low-hanging fruit. Happy with that? The next thing is I call it a little higher sales risk, because the developers in the room know that this is all about sales risk, okay? So this is a little harder, but it's still the opportunities there. And that is to build townhouses in duplex arrangements, okay? And the beauty of a duplex arrangement is that allows light and air in this part of the townhouse, okay? And that should be offset. So if that's the front of the townhouse, it's either got a view, it's close to amenity, and it's got connectivity. So it might be over a bike path or something like that. There's a market for that, and it's a strong market. And a lot of the work that Paul and I have done, particularly in the regions closer to Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, and in one case Perth, those developers have provided that, and they're targeting the downsizer market. And they're smart enough to say, here, as this part of the development, there is 4 to 6 places where you can park a boat or your caravan. You can lease it, and this is part of a men's shed type thing at the back, in a garden patch type of thing. That's part of the body corporate or part of the provision. And the first inquiry often is, can I get one of those, and then I'll buy this townhouse. Okay? So they don't need to have that as part of them. Although some of the retirement villages, even in Maryborough, RV, RV home base, they actually, their whole stock is driven around where you park the caravan and how you park the boat, and the housing happens to be above it or next to it and so forth. So they're conscious of that, but they're not on large lots. Okay, so the market doesn't only want that. The other thing as well, of course, is you can build townhouses like this, and that's fine, but this is a better configuration, particularly if you can provide at the cost points. I'm amazed, Paul's amazed, when we came and did this work, because we've done a lot of work in Yeppoon in the past, but we haven't been here for a couple of years. So when we did our first reconnoitre, and we do things like we search all sales records before we come, you know, so we see what's happening and so forth. And I said to Paul, there's something wrong here, there's no townhouses. Where's the townhouses? Because a place like this normally would have a lot more townhouse stock, townhome stock, okay? It doesn't. And you might say, it's not wanted. I challenge that. I don't think it's been provided of recent years. And the third thing that's a little riskier, and again, we're not talking about high-rise development and targeting tourists only and a risk profile that's very high, but the third thing that's a little risky risk is maybe double arrow up, is something to do with apartments. But what we're talking about is targeting owner residents, and we're talking about doing it smart. So the parking's at grade, okay? Reduce the cost. The configuration of the property is, it can be lifted, but it's usually 2 to 4 per level, not 16 per level and so forth. The easiest way to build an apartment is a 2-bedroom and a 3-bedroom mix. And the 2-bedroom product is very easy to do, but apartments are overcomplicated. This is the view, or this is the amenity spot. You enter this way, you divide an apartment like this. So you come into the thing, you either have your kitchen there, you might go, shock horror, it doesn't have a view, we'll get to that. This is your laundry, your storage, and your storage and linen and so forth. You have bathroom 1, bathroom 2, bed 1, bed 2, that has a balcony, and this is living and dining. You could have the kitchen go around that way, and that becomes a butler's kitchen, if that's a market for that. So it's the kitchen that runs here with a galley bench, but that's a secondary thing. So that market appeals to a downsizer who's cost conscious. So doing a design like that, I've probably taken 50 to 100 grand out of a unit design, and more so if I build parking at grade. And whilst the kitchen doesn't get the view in most cases, they're eating out here on one of these balconies which they share, and they have this space because when they invite their friends and relatives, they want to show off the bedroom. They don't want them in the pokey little place. It's equal to theirs. More importantly, I could rent that out to younger renters for 2 equal incomes. So I can get 600 a week or 500 a week if I can rent that side out for 250 a week. It's hard to do if one of the bedrooms is weaker and less. Okay? And if you're to build 3-bedroom stock, you just repeat that here. That's the 2-bedroom component and the 1-bedroom component, and this becomes I call it a dual key. It has access throughout the apartment, but that allows somebody to actually have a visitor stay. It due course allows to have a carer stay in that property, and so forth. Or the boomerang child who comes back, or something like that for a period of time. So they're the type of things that are riskier stock. So when we're talking a summary about what we're proposing and what we think is missing, based on the demographics and based on a good hard look of what's in being provided and what's being used and how it's being used and so forth, a simple summary is this. This is the traditional home. This is high-rise apartments. The need is for what we'll call the missing middle. And it's not just middle ring suburbs, it's the housing stock that's in between that finer grain, which ranges from a small lot home to small apartments, small apartment complexes, and includes terraces and townhouses and backyard homes and dual occupancy. It's that type of stock that's missing, and we think that in the over the next 5 years in particular, that stock is in demand and increasingly in demand. This council wants to explore that and look at that detail. That's a fantastic opportunity. You already have policies here that allow that to be started quite quickly. If I was to talk to some of the more capital city-based developers about this opportunity, they get it straight away. They'd be looking to explore it. That's one avenue to help start this. But many in your room should actually be, I believe, looking a little harder about where the market's going, what type of stock can be provided, particularly after this home builder bubble or lump comes through the market and some more normal settings take place. Thank you for listening. You might have questions, comments, queries. Please ask them. We've got some revolting mics to move around to ask the questions, so thank you very much. I'm just a song and dance man. There must be some questions, come on.
Hello. Hi, I'll start. Mary from Capricorn Enterprise. So there's a big block of land in the middle of Yeppoon, just down the road here, the railway, or the old railway site. State government own part of it, council owns part of it. From what you've presented today, would you consider that that would be a prime opportunity for council to be proactive with the development community perhaps, and the state government obviously as a partner, to develop that site and lead the way?
Yes. So some of that's one of the things that's important is, as I mentioned, is density needs to be offset. So part of that site needs to have something that is an amenity-based thing. Whether or not that's the proposal, that's the station and that type of market and that type of thing, I think that would be a very good thing. It's in play and discussed. The other thing is that there's parcels of that land that can be done and developed in partnership with individual developers, state government, and you should control the form of that. So that might take the thing of terraces and townhouses or some form of apartment. It could also take a build-to-rent solution, which Paul and I have done a lot of work on, and that's part of that younger rent tenant household, and also for when mining and resource things ramp up. All build-to-rent is basically product that guarantees tenure to the rental market. That's all it is. Now, it has to be done a certain way, and there's certain tricks to it, but that could be part of that opportunity. But yes, that site and other sites around are actually great opportunities, and it's just there. I do think it needs a non-residential amenity component to it, not only in the connectivity to connect that to the water and the octopus or kraken or whatever it is and those type of things, but also it needs something that drives that, what I call funk in town. It needs something that is brewery based, market based, not hard, not just tourism. Something that the locals can go to shop, gather, call their own. And that wasn't a seeded question, but it looked like it was, wasn't it?
This one might be. Amenity, external larger amenity, i.e. the resorts that have fallen into hard times around the place. How do you see their fortunes coming and their importance for adding to the localised amenity you just discussed?
Okay, so there's a couple around that I mentioned to my wife the other day, I'm coming back to Yeppoon, and then she straight away said, "What's it called? The one that the one we used to play golf at. We used to go to conferences." She said, "Oh, the last time we went to," I said, "Well, Julia, that's my wife's name's Julia. That's long gone." So it's still the people hang on to that, and that still exists and so forth. There are opportunities that I understand that the person who owns it and the identity and all that are difficult and so on, maybe even harder than difficult. But they're things that should be seized upon, if they can be, and turned around and changed. Not into its current form. It needs to take a different form. Whether or not that's just accommodation, or whether or not it's the golf course is reused and something's happened there. So, and that's a reflection of a market that we're not talking about. That was a cyclical market, and I actually, and an opportunity taken as part of that cycle, and an overselling of really what should have been here. But they're underutilised. First thing I say when Paul and I went in there last year was say, if there's a vacancy rate of 0, why isn't this being used in some shape or form for occupants? I just don't understand. Other than the ownership, who owns and the difficulty of access and all those type of, and doing something with it. But it's low-hanging fruit again if you can get through the process of converting that into some form of occupation. Occupation for particularly people who are resource-based and so forth, it doesn't have to be the Hyatt, okay? It needs to be clean, functional and so forth, but it doesn't have to be the ants' pants. Often they just take a bed and a shower. Sorry? What was the no? Sorry. Oh yeah, yes, okay, no doubt. That's what I say, difficult to work with. And that's sad.
I was just inquiring.
Can we just ask this one and then we'll pass the microphone
working?
down the back?
Just like that.
Yeah, it's on. Sing.
I was just inquiring about, you were saying 450 square blocks. I looked at a development in Sydney the other day, which was
In Sydney?
Yeah, which was down to West Sydney. It was, which was down to 300 square blocks. What we have here is, I'm just thinking out loud, and I own some land. What we have is a resource base. People that work, fly in, fly out, so they work out the mines mainly. And what they really want is, if they're a single man, is they want to be able to come to a place, lay their hat, and then go and do what they want to do. And so what I was thinking more of the lines of a 300 square block, so we could build really small units.
Well, they're not units, they might be houses.
Well, proper houses. The ones in Sydney are, West Sydney are. And it seemed to be, it sold like hotcakes in Sydney.
Oh, well, Paul and I can take you to stuff in Brisbane. It's 125 square metres.
There you go.
And that sells really well. And one of the providers that I think would come here if they knew about the opportunity and the council's attitude towards it are a provider of that type of stock. Now, they don't provide it everywhere and they don't provide it on all of their developments, but they do it where it's near the park and so forth, and it's a target audience. It's often the divorced lady or it's a single person. Forget what they do as an occupation. And in some of that cases, that's offset with community facilities that allows them to park their ute there, not in the property, because the ute's the ute. It's outside. It's in the what? Now the difficulty that trips up is they can't keep Bluey, their blue heeler, actually as part of that housing stock. They might have to buy a 350 square metre block to make that work and so forth. And I don't want you to get hung up with the fact that I said 450 or 500 square metre. I want you to get it. The concept is that you can have blocks like that and you can zero lot line that product, so you can build to the boundary and you can orientate that stock so it gets the better aspect in terms of north and light and shade and breeze and so forth. You can do that relatively easy. It's a sales risk, okay? Now in Sydney, they sell because of the price point. And if you can provide that stock here for the right price point, 300, 400,000, I believe they will sell.
There you go.
And later on you can talk to us about commissioning us to actually prove that up on paper, okay? You can ask Russell, we are cheap for the bang for buck. You can ask the future mayor of Rockhampton that we are cheap. How's the count going, Russell?
My question is more about infrastructure. Like we're talking about bringing homes and all these people coming, but if our demographic is getting to the point we've got retirees and aged people and downsizers, there's not enough medical here.
Okay, well then they can go to Rockhampton.
Yeah, but we need to be able to have something that, if we've got an emergency, you've got to be able to have like an x-ray here on a Saturday or a Sunday, because we don't have it at this moment in time. So that's something I think the council really should look at. Like my mum had to have an emergency x-ray. She waited 4 hours for the ambulance to take her, and another 3 when you got to Rocky. So we don't have that for our elderly here.
Okay, and I don't disagree with that, but that's all I can say about that. So,
I know.
So infrastructure is, there's a couple of sides of infrastructure. Now that you've raised that, I'd like to talk quickly about infrastructure. There's a couple of things at infrastructure that need some discussion. There's hard infrastructure and there's soft infrastructure. The soft infrastructure is the beach, things like that. Hard infrastructure is the hospital, the university, the sewerage and water supply, the road connectivity, things like that. So that is a supply and demand side of things, and that needs to be, I believe that needs to be supplied in terms of catering for the needs of an ageing population. I won't say where it should be and how it should be supplied. That's not an expertise I have. One of the opportunities this council has and this area has, and I understand a study's being commissioned to find out exactly what the situation is that where we're standing now, the pipes underneath us aren't used to anywhere near their capacity, which is rare for a town. Normally you have to augment the sewerage and water supply. So one of the opportunities from a housing space is that there can be a lot more infill here, assuming the study shows what quite a few people suspect in council, is that there is there's a spare capacity here, and we can get more housing in here and not necessarily have to ramp up taxes and charges. The other thing that council does very well is that they delay or give opportunity to delay your infrastructure charges at sale or on completion of your development, which is very rare. If I just said that to some Brisbane developers, they'll phone, they'll come up here, because they normally have to pay up front. And it makes it very difficult for the development to stack up. Your point is a good one. Do you want to make a response? Paul, microphone. Thanks for the question.
In terms of the response in relation to the health service, clearly council has no control over that, but I am aware that the Central Queensland Hospital and Health Service, pardon my voice, I've been losing it all day, the Central Queensland Hospital and Health Service is bringing down a strategic plan for the Capricorn Coast Hospital in March this year, and it will be addressing a number of the issues that have been raised: aged care, x-rays, emergency services and so on. So fingers crossed that Central Queensland Hospital and Health Service step up with that one.
Well, one last one from me. The 660 people per annum.
650, but close enough.
Okay. Is that something that should be just accepted? It seemed low for me, and I don't know how it fits in with council's desire for being able to pay their way, but is that something that we just sit back and accept? Or
Okay, a couple of things on that. First of all, when we see a figure like that, because we look at forecasts are updated on a regular basis, but they're updated, they're using information a year or two behind. And COVID's thrown a little spanner in the works, so we've got to look through that. And so what we do is we review what's been happening in recent 5 years and 10-year period and 20-year period, and we see if that's accelerating or decreasing, and we adopt a figure that we think makes sense. That's the first point. So this figure makes sense based on past recent trends, and it's been something that's been increasing. So it's moving upwards rather than doing this. The second thing as well is that you can say all you like that the population target's 650 a year. Unless you provide the right stock and the right employment opportunities and so forth, it won't happen. Now, I could argue that less development in some cases is better than no development, or less development is better than less population growth, better than a lot of population growth. But that has a sting in its tail. And sadly, what happens in Australia is that economy grows largely because of three things. We take on debt, we have an increase in productivity. We're not really good at increasing productivity, despite how many times we want to pat ourselves on the back. And the second thing is we expand a population, and that's population growth. We need that unless we change our manufacturing and so forth. So we need that to underpin health services and employment and so forth. That's the thing. Yes, it does add more cars. In regional Queensland, for every 1,000 people that move in an area, 900 new cars come to the area. That's a stat that's actually been proven over and over again. It's 750 in a capital city, it's 850 in Tasmania, for argument's sake, and it's about 900 in regional Queensland, because guess what? There's not many other services you've got to drive. So there is more cars on the road. You've got to handle car parking and so forth. The high-rise car park in downtown is a reflection of that. I see a lot of other spaces that are underutilised that right now could have cars on them. As Russell and I were talking about, they don't have to be asphalt. You can park on grass, okay? It's not a big deal, and so forth. And that can take a temporary measure as other things are done. Another thing with the population and its desirability, which usually lends to a crowding and a traffic situation, is that we don't use a lot of the spaces that we have well neither. So I think that we're going to see at least 650 plus people move here a year. Could even be higher than that if the right stock's provided and that coincides with the right type of employment opportunities. It seems to be in the wider region here that the employment opportunities are there. How many more are we going to take? One more? Two more? Two more. And then you can all go away.
Michael, do you see the rise of electronic mobility aids making a difference to how internal areas are designed?
Yeah.
Or cities actually work?
Yeah, okay, so that's a good question. So one of the things I haven't talked about in that quick doodle I drew is that if you're to build a house, and particularly anything to do with dual occupancy and the like, you should be looking at for some form of disability from the get-go, and that includes, you know, size of passageways and bench levels and things like that. It's not just for an NDIS assistance, but just in general mobility. And then if you looked at how things have changed, particularly in the States and in certain areas in the States, even in places like Flagstaff, where, God, you're driving those scooters and you're taking your own life in your hands, but they're everywhere. That type of thing, if you do anything moving forward, there's going to be more shared spaces, they're going to be more non-car type things, there's going to be pedestrians, but there's going to be lifts and whatever they're all called, those scootery things, and they're going to be then a change to that as well. If there's an ageing structure, there'll be more people in wheelchairs or some form of assistance. That's going to increase. So anything that's designed moving forward, that's going to have to be factored into that. Knowing, of course, that increasingly an app is the security button or the panic button rather than anything else that needs to be hardwired and provided. That needs to be done with some form of vision moving forward. So yeah, there's more of it, particularly in the home, but also in the spaces that are going to be traversed, particularly by an ageing population. Mike. Just hold it. It takes a mayoral touch.
Thank you. I love what you're saying about the dual occupancy and the townhouse idea. The only thing from my lived experience is the smaller complexes, you know, with 20 or less units, the body corporate fees are massive, and that then becomes a barrier to to purchase.
Okay, so let's talk about townhouses. There is lots of townhouses, and increasingly so that the townhouses, particularly in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, don't have a body corporate. They're designed to not have that. There is a downside in that. You don't have a body corporate free, you're buying freehold title, except that you're living very close to your neighbour, and if that neighbour refuses to paint their house or maintain their house, then it does affect your potential resale, and it's very hard for you to badger them and say paint your house when they don't want to. Particularly if they're not an owner, they're an investor. They are an owner, but they don't live there. So there is a sting in that tail. Secondly is if you provide the stock that is wanted by the target market, do they need a pool? Do they need a gym? They need a good foyer, they need a range of other things. Do they need a rooftop garden? No, they don't really. They've got the facilities downtown. If it's offset, they don't use them, so that you don't provide them. So you can limit your body corporate fees, yes, and it comes to a sinking fund, and it comes to the maintenance of the lift and some guarding and some type of presence, but that can be reduced. You've got to keep in mind as well that a body corporate fee includes your building insurance, and your building insurance is a large component of your insurance, your cost every year. When you factor that out and you build the right stock, that becomes a manageable thing. The trouble is a lot of the stock that's existing here that I know you may live in, is that it's a resource-based thing with all these bells and whistles that nobody really uses. I mean, I've been here 3 or 4 times, I live in Tasmania these days, so in bloody hot conditions, and nobody's in the pool, you know? Yeah. So a body corporate's there. It's often the 4th tier of government, and it is in your face. It's worse than the other 3 tiers. Nothing like the Livingstone Shire Council, but it's in your face, and often who's in charge of the body corporate is the ex-tugboat operator. You know, don't do this and don't do that. Well, if they've actually no pool and no things, they're not really managing that much. So it's a process of not just doing the cookie cutter provision of we've done a pool, we've done this. Most people Paul and I interview, and we do follow-up work about, particularly in ageing market, they want a big square space that makes sense, that takes the view in, they can entertain their friends, they can get in and out of the lift well with their groceries and everything very, very quickly. There's a lot of examples at the top end of the market, particularly in Europe and America, where the car goes up with you and you park it at your level, because I've got one car and it's a nice car and I'll look after it, but it's to do with day-to-day life, the grocery shopping, the transfer. So those things need to work quite well, but the body corporates are often too high because there's a lot of things attached to it that are very costly. You can reduce your body corporate fee a lot if you don't have a lift, okay? And some of these might be walk-ups, but I suspect they're best if they've got a lift. Lift's not that much expensive to provide. Eventually it becomes more up at the sinking fund. Noted, but it can be resolved. Okay, we're going to take another one. Thank you. I'm glad you asked a question.
Michael, thinking about small lot housing, there is a way that council could assist more with that. One of the problems is the cost of the infrastructure charges compared to the sale price of the block. For instance, the infrastructure charge is the same when you create an allotment, whether it's a $1 million beachfront lot or a $180,000 700 square metre lot or a $125,000 300 square metre lot. And so if you're creating small lots such as a 300 square metre that you want to sell for 125,000, the infrastructure charges is 25% or 20% of the total value. By the time you take that out plus your 10% GST, there's not a lot left, and that's one of the reasons the small lots aren't being developed.
Thank you. That's a very good question and a very good I'll have a response to that. We talked in our group session where you came to one of those things that Paul and I ran, and that type of thing was discussed. I am of the opinion, and it's the council, they've asked us some things on how they can help. I think it's very good that their infrastructure fees are opportunity to pay at the end of the scale, but I also think that affordability in Australia is eroded by the taxes and charges, and it's the quantum of taxes and charges, which comes from a state government situation, but it should be a percentage, in my opinion, as we discussed, a percentage of the purchase price, not just a flat fee. And it should be based around 5 to 7%. So if you're building $1 million block of land, often that block of land's in the prime location, it gets a lot of amenity, okay, in terms of where it's located and so forth, and that market can bear the price at the 5% level. But buying a small lot, more affordable housing, should be paying at the 5 to 7% of the purchase price. If that was done in Queensland, you would see immediately a lot more alternate stock provided, and so forth. So it's one opportunity the council can think about, particularly in kick-starting this type of change, that if that was done, then that would help with terms of the provision of those blocks. True. And I write my website there, matusik.com.au, because I write something every week on a Tuesday. It's called the Matusik Missive. It's free. If you didn't want to put your name down and get an email sent to me every Tuesday evening, that's fine. But if you went to my website and just searched infrastructure charges, there's a case about that, exact what we're talking about, with evidence and numbers and so forth. So thanks for that. That wasn't a set one neither. Pity it wasn't, though, because that was a good question. Okay, one more. Thank you, and then we will call it quits.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. What a wonderful job you've done in presenting. Small lots. The only reason we beat New South Wales is because we've got, behind our house, we have 1,000 square metres. Are we going to give up the right to flog New South Wales in state of origin? Because all our blocks traditionally have 1,000 square metres behind them, or are we going to go back to 350 square metre blocks or 125, and when our kid kicks the ball, he needs somebody 7 houses down to catch it?
Very good point, very good point. Well, there might be a park that they can actually kick the ball in and play with other kids, but having said that, we're not saying that all those blocks are cut up.
You're from Tasmania?
No, I'm actually from Brisbane. And I grew up in Sydney, and I used to play Amco Cup, and I'm just a bit of credentials here, for my pain and for my bad upbringing, I played for Maris Brothers Parramatta, and I used to be a halfback. Believe it or not, I used to be a halfback, and my opposite number at Patrician Brothers was Peter Sterling. Do you think I could lay a hand on Peter Sterling? No way. So I actually played football at some elite level way back then. So I know what you're talking about. We're not saying that we're getting rid of the 1,000 square metre block or the 4,000 square metre block. Those blocks and that demand will stay. It will stay probably at the current level, okay? What we're saying is that as the market moves forward and that population growth, there will be a greater demand for the alternate stock. The existing stock will actually stay. So a market can have a choice. They want to buy 1,000 square metres and pay the 280 or 250 a block, they can do that. If they want to buy the 4,000 square metre block and buy it for Tony and in the way that he sells those stuff, that's fine. They'll pay $650 for a house land package or something like that. That's fine. But there is a market who actually want to live closer to town or in a smaller block. And those people, yeah, they'll have to go to the park to kick the footy.
We want to beat New South Wales.
Will Queensland beat New South Wales again this year? Probably. Frankly, I don't care. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your interest. Thanks for not leaving. Russell will close the show. Thank you very much.
Adam? So thank you all for coming. We will have something posted on either our Facebook page or our web page, so there will be information available for you to access. And then I would encourage you to continue the conversation with us. So I'm Russell Klaus and Sonia Barber and Ellie Wallen. We're in the Economic Development and Places Unit. So you can talk to us. We're pretty easy to contact. And we look forward to continuing this because it'll take you some time to digest the information, and hopefully that will generate some new thought processes about what the opportunities may be, and then we can work together to ensure that some of that is delivered. I don't know how much will be delivered, but I know that something will be. As Michael has pointed out, the market has changed, and we're only offering one product at this point in time. We all have different wishes about what we want. Nobody goes to the ice cream store and everybody gets vanilla. So it's the same with the housing market, and that's really essentially what Michael has been saying. So please get in contact, and thank you all for coming. And we'll be around if you want to chat us up. Thanks.